Welcome to the Retro Porsche Cup at Salzburing with ESR. We have some of our best drivers on the grid today, although it's not the largest grid in the world. With me on commentary is a man who has researched this car and is in general one of our motorsports experts, Mr. Scott Nix. Say hello to the people.
Alright, thanks. Good to be here. I have done a little bit of research this week. Managed to put a few hours in to try and figure out some of the various drivers that drove these cars, hunting down some old photos. Really hard to find video, of course, from this era. We're talking 1976 to the early 80s. But
what video we do find is of relatively poor quality based on modern standard.
Yes, yeah, I don't think we appreciate, even though this doesn't seem all that long ago, at least to me. It was not a digital age.
It was not. I remember watching some photos from the 1976 Formula One championship because my dad was always a big fan of that particular championship battle between James Hunt and Niki Lauda, and just going, this is so terrible. But at the same time, I was about 7 at the time.
Yeah, it's particularly hard to watch the old stuff, because the definition is so low. But the thing you got to appreciate is that back then, the TVs looked like that, and you didn't really notice that because that's the way everything looked.
Anyone in the chat has anything they want to point out that's not going particularly correct in the broadcast, please let us know and we will try to correct it. We have 10 minutes to go in qualifying here, with currently in the pole position, that is Felipe Fajea, representing Division 2, thank you. Ahead of Yevgeny Lazarenko, Vinnie Roberts, who will go faster than that, I guarantee that, Eric Friesen, and Richard DeRoche. Speaking of that, Vinnie Roberts just taken pole. Although not a purple third sector.
Yeah, I think based on the leaderboards we've seen so far, I think we can expect that Vinnie will manage pole, but Darcy has been putting up some pretty stout times, at least the practice we've seen.
Darcy is a phenomenally quick driver, and he will generally find a way to succeed. Steve Carman coming across the line in pole position. Nice work by the Steve Carman.
Indeed, he's probably one that would be good to pick his brain about these cars as well. I have a feeling he has some good knowledge about these old cars.
Yeah, I feel like Steve is a little bit of a retro race car driver specialist in a way. He seems to do well when we crack out the older stuff a lot of the time, which is a bit odd because, as Byron has stated in the past, he is a cyborg and therefore should be all about the new technology.
Indeed, Mr. Car Man.
Half car, half man. Which half will reign today? We are still missing lap times from Mr. Martin Edmonds and Mr. Darcy Parkinson. Both are very quick drivers and could mess us up a little bit. Just 8 cars, which might be a problem because these cars are, as Darcy has put in his own broadcast, death traps.
Yep, fortunately I believe they're going to be running this race without damage on, which is probably a smart idea. It's very easy to lose the rear end of these cars, particularly when you lift the throttle. The back end tends to come around on you. They're kind of cursed by, it seems like, both oversteer and understeer, depending on whether you're going fast, you're going, throttle down or throttle off.
I appreciate that, though, because when I first started playing Race Room, one thing that did always strike me as a bit weird was that the classic retro cars from an age of much harder to drive cars and much more skill demanding cars were not appreciably more difficult to drive, which was always to me a bit of a realism immersion breaker to a degree.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that. I think they're probably I can think of some of those the GTOs and stuff that are probably easier to drive in the game than they would have been in real life. But having said that,
classics as well.
Yeah, I think having said that too, that they're still definitely a little harder, at least, than a modern GT3 or something like that in the game. But I kind of agree with what you're saying there.
Oh, Martin Edmonds off the track there, and as is Eric Friesen. I do like that car that Eric Friesen is driving. Very, very nice. Good luck to Travis Wallace, who's racing the Daytona 24 Hour right now. I was watching his stream a little bit earlier on. So after this, you can go and check that out. They were in first place in their class.
That's doing quite well then. Yep, let's not forget that the real 24 Hours of Daytona is next weekend.
Anyone you're particularly excited to see participate in the 24 Hours this year?
I think that the main thing I'd like to see is the Mazda prototype actually make some more headway. I think they managed to finish the Petit Le Mans last year. I think on maybe second and third. It's probably some of their best results. But they'd be an interesting car to see if they can get that thing improved and keep moving it up.
Apologies for the pop-up from Steam there. It appears that my overlay has gotten itself undisabled for a change. And, yeah, shout out to Mark Labzul, who's just been on the broadcast powering up his race room. Maybe he's coming to join them. So Vinnie Roberts back on track, currently in pole position ahead of Darcy Parkinson, Martin Edmonds, Steve Carman, Richard DeRoche, Eric Friesen, Felipe Fehe, and Yevgeny Lazarenko. I must say Yevgeny seems to be the driver who I think is probably struggling the most in these cars. Not just because he's in 8th place, but because it's a very uncustomary position for the Ukrainian.
So Vinny continues to lead here. He's set at 127.756. I believe his best leaderboard time was about a half second faster.
Probably won't be able to replicate the leaderboard time, I would think, in this particular session, though, so that might be about as fast as he gets, but we'll see. Eric Friesen bumps Richard DeRoche down a spot, taking 5th position. A lot of tire smoke coming off of these cars.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how Yevgeny performs in this race. He's been particularly fast in the last racing series in particular, the Winter Championship multi-class thing we had. So it should be interesting how he can handle these older cars.
He had a fantastic charge back through the grid at Sepang with the Wednesday series as well. Had some early on troubles where he got some damage, had to make a pit stop, and still managed to come back to finish in 11th place.
Quite impressive.
Him and Darcy having an interesting run back through the field. Can't remember if it was those two that actually had the contact that caused them to have to pit on the first lap, or if they had two unrelated accidents, but that may be worth going back and checking out on the first lap video from Sepang, which was a little bit of a rough and tumble affair. And just a note, ESR will be coming to Chang International Speedway, the destination of speed, this Wednesday for 0 Round 2 and the first sprint races of the season.
Indeed, that's where the Asian Le Mans series was last weekend for the 4 hours of I can't even say it.
Buriram.
Buriram.
I personally think that's one of the most underrated circuits on the planet.
It does not seem to get a lot of high-profile series go through there.
Just a lot of Asian regional competition, I guess. And World Touring Cars used to go there. And I believe WTCR still does. To make up for Byron not being here by going on extreme racing tangent.
Yes, that's true. I'm trying to make up for the lack of Byron by having some alcohol by my side. I'm not sure it's quite as high proof as he would have.
Well, I mean, you're also probably not as large as Byron is. He is a man who's gone by Byron Giant for a long time, and it is an incredibly fitting screen name. I must say, I'm enjoying the variety of liveries the Porsche presents, at least. And Darcy Parkinson goes to pole! Darcy Parkinson just beats Vinnie Roberts out for pole position at the moment. And Vinny's going to have only one more crack to try to take that back. Depending on where he is on the track, he may have two. Let's see here. Let us pull up Mr. Vinny Roberts. No, just one more chance. Vinny's still in Sector 1. We might as well ride with him as he is probably the most interesting man on the track right now. Just starting what is his final chance to get back to pole position. Of course, the obligatory Red Bull sponsorship signs. Needed, of course, on all Austrian tracks.
Yep, there he goes trying to hustle that thing around the corner. You can see it really trying to step out from underneath him.
And he's got a purple first sector up 4.46. Now, mind you, I must say Vinny's been notably faster than everyone in the first sector. That's been his primary site of advantage. But still 0.4 of a second, which actually Darcy Parkinson crossing the line, beating his own pole time, and has widened the gap out to 0.373. Putting the pressure on Vinny, but he's got pole right now if he can hold up this pace. Or no, pardon me, he does not. The gap on his first sector time is now down to 2:08. So he needs to make up. He is down at the second sector. He's plus 1.47, or 147 at the second sector. And the third sector is very short, so I think Vinny's going to come up short here. And man, he gets wide on that last turn. Darcy Parkinson will start from pole position ahead of Vinny Roberts, Martin Edmonds, Eric Friesen, Steve Carman, Richard Durocher, Philip Fehea, and Yevgeny Lazarenko. That is your grid for the one-off Porsche Cup event here at Salzburing. Also, shout out to Scout and his race room spectator stuff. I do like that qualifying screen stays up a lot longer.
So I can't recall at this point. We've restarted so many times because of technical difficulties, but just to reiterate, what we're watching is it's a group of 1976 or so Porsche 934 RSR turbos. These are Group 4 cars. They are
at the moment the entirety of Group 4.
Yes, that's true. We'll have to see what else Race Room can provide us. But these things had 480 brake horsepower, 3-liter flat 6 engines. Of course, rear-engined cars, because they are 911s, just like the modern 911s. I did discover some interesting quotes from various relatively famous motorsports drivers over the years, including ones about how incredibly terrible these things were to drive.
Well, at least we're not alone with our complaints about the car. I feel like, and I could be wrong on this, and anyone with more knowledge can stop me, but I remember there was a Autosports podcast I was listening to some time ago, and the time frame is definitely correct. And they were talking to, I believe it was Derek Bell, who was working with the Porsche sports car program. And they were talking about people who should go into the Hall of Fame for sports cars on Autosport. And one of the people he mentioned was an engineer for the Porsche program, who at one point asked him, they were walking through the Porsche factory, and he just asked him, what's the RPM on one of the straights on the tracks they were testing? I think it was at Spa. And Derek, or whoever the driver was, told him, and he takes out a calculator, does a little bit of math, while we're talking Yevgeny Lazarenko off the track. Actually, it was Eric Friesen who went off the track. Pardon me. My apologies, Yevgeny. Takes out a calculator, does the math, and kind of makes like a amused smirk at, I guess, his calculations. And apparently back at that time they didn't have a speedometer in the car. So Derek asked him, how fast was that? And the engineer goes, I think it is perhaps better that you don't know.
These things are scary when you get them up to speed, and then when you lift the throttle and the back end starts to come around. I don't think I'd have the balls big enough to drive one of these in real life.
Genny Lazarenko sliding backwards in the pack, losing spots to Richard DeRoche and Felipe Fejea. At the front, it is Vinnie Roberts leading Darcy Parkinson.
Yeah, it looks like Vinny got a great getaway there at the start and pulled a bit of a gap on Darcy, but Darcy's managing to hold on.
Indeed, and they're quickly leaving Martin Edmonds, who's gotten up into third place, kind of for dead. I think it's a long enough race that obviously it's not over, and really no one is out of this. We're talking about a 13-second gap throughout the field for a 37-minute race. But I think it's between these two men right here, Vinnie Roberts and Darcy Parkinson.
So Vinny is driving the number, let's see, what is that? Is he in the 94?
He is in the 94, that is correct.
Oh, okay.
From Equipe Almeris Freris.
That's right, yes.
I probably butchered that.
Yep, French race car driver raced with his brother at the 1980 Le Mans in that car. They did not finish. Managed 251 out of...
Oh, I hate to break it up a little
laps.
bit, but Steve Carman in the kitty litter. As he loses a spot to Richard DeRoche.
Yeah, that first chicane is quite hard to get right, because it is very hard to break in these cars without losing control, so you want to come into it at great speed, but if you don't get your braking point right, there's no forgiveness.
And we've also got Yevgeny Lazarenko turning up the heat on Felipe Fejea for 6th place. As Steve Carman is recovering from that trip into the kitty litter, he is going to be vulnerable to both the cars behind him, the 62 and the 70. Darcy Parkinson has taken the lead. Roberts has gone off. We missed that.
I see. Yep, indeed he has. It's quite a bit of time there.
Mm-hmm. And Felipe Fejea putting the pressure on Steve Carman, with Yevgeny Lazarenko dropping ever so slightly back. We ride on board with Fejea. The one thing about a grid this small is the recognition of who's driving what car is going to be very easy. Because there's not a tremendously large number of very similar liveries.
Yes, Sector 3 did do a good job of giving us quite a number of liveries to choose from, so it is nice that everybody does have a unique one.
Big shout out to, I think it was Richard DeRoche, who realized he was in a duplicate livery and changed. Felipe Fejea getting by Steve Carman for 5th place, and now Yevgeny on the attack. In the meantime, Darcy Parkinson has about a 3.5 second lead at the front of the pack.
Yeah, Vinny has lost quite a bit of time here. I unfortunately did not see that off. You can't have damage, though. We're running this race without damage enabled, to my knowledge, so...
I believe you are correct on that, but we also saw Vinny, as fast as he was, having some definitive problems with staying on the track during practice and qualifying. Steve Carman slipping further back as he loses a spot to Yevgeny Lazarenko, and now has Eric Friesen, who is on a recovery drive after a pretty significant off on the first lap on his tail. Meantime, at the front, Vinny had pulled back some time, but is now losing that time again.
Yeah, the number 94, as I was saying, driven at the 1980 24 Hours of Le Mans. Did not finish due to an accident. I believe it rained quite a bit in that race. Interestingly, this car is still owned by that family who owns a Porsche dealership somewhere in France. And it appears that that exact Porsche 934 is still used in hill climb racing. And I base that on a little snippet I read and the fact that they have those lights on the front of it now.
Very impressive how these cars continue to, even 20, 30 years later, still viable and used in competition. Eric Friesen, as we said, a little bit out of position on the attack against Steve Carman. This is pretty much the most interesting battle on the track right now, despite the fact that it is only for 7th place. And they're catching up to the 6th place car of Yevgeny Lazarenko. Lazarenko was the slowest man in qualifying, but we know he is an exceptionally capable driver and capable of a lot more.
I should say I spent some time trying to drive this car. I have been using a shifter in auto clutch mode, and I'd like to say my lower leaderboard time is a result of that, but I'm doubting if I used a shifter or the paddles that like most of these guys, or if not all of them, are doing, that I'd be much faster, or I would be faster, but...
Well, you're still faster than me if that's any consolation.
Not really.
I could not get a legal lap in.
They are very difficult to drive, there's no doubt. Mm-hmm. So this car here, this number 90, is actually the same car, if I'm not mistaken, as one of the others that's on the grid. It was used at about a year apart in 2 different races.
That'd be the one driven by Mr. Darcy Parkinson, correct?
Yes, correct. The number 90, which was Bernard, was the driver, listed at least.
He has currently got it out in front by over a little bit under 5 seconds now, versus Vinnie Roberts. These two had a shocking battle for pole, and was hoping for maybe a little bit more exhilarating of a battle for the lead, but it's early days yet. There may be something in store here, as Vinny clearly does make up a lot of ground in some places. By the way, Philip Vehea overtaking Richard DeRoche. I think that's because DeRoche may have gone off the track, because he's also lost spots to Evgeny Lazarenko, Eric Friesen, and now Steve Carman.
Now, these cars are unforgiving. If you make a little error, they are gone, and it will take you some time to recover.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the number 90 driven by Darcy Parkinson, the chassis, that exact car, is the same car that Yevgeny is also driving. The number 90 was in the... let's see, is that right? Yes, the number 90 was in the 1980 24 Hours of Le Mans, and the Yevgeny's was in the 1981 24 Hours of Le Mans.
Same driver, or just a complete overhaul in that regard?
Different drivers, obviously different liveries, but same car. Now, I base this information on whatever website I can find this on, racingreference.com. A lot of these websites have good information but are incredibly painful to look at, and I'm not sure why that is.
It is interesting to note that cars, in sports car racing in particular, their lives go on, as it were. Whereas for those of us who are more Formula One, IndyCar, that sort of fans, the reusing of cars doesn't really occur. But in sports cars, because it's a more production-based sport, the tendency to actually have the same car appear multiple times is quite interesting.
Yeah, it reminds me of the trying to hunt down what happened to the original The Mercedes that started AMG was the Red Pig. I can't recall its name now. Big, ugly, heavy thing. And I was reading about what happened to that car.
Oh! Not to break you up, but Evgeny
Sure.
Lazarenko and Eric Friesen go hard into the wall. This is going to play into promoting Steve Carman and Richard DeRoche from the back of the pack. Due to the hard contact between the 70 and the number 70 and the Eric Friesen's number is eluding me right now, the 56. Carman now leading or trailing. Actually, pardon me, I was right the first time. Leading Richard DeRoche because Yevgeny is rejoined, actually in 5th place. So Eric Friesen coming off the worst of that. That's his second big shunt of the day. And he is at the back of the pack now, 41 seconds off the lead.
And up front we have Vinny. Looks like he's gained quite a bit of time back on Darcy, so I'm not sure if Darcy had an off moment or not.
I think it's just that Vinny is definitively the faster of the two, just not necessarily more consistent. And this is, really, to be honest, this is the classic sim racing battle right now of fast over a single lap, raw pace, versus the ability to apply that pace over lap after lap.
Indeed, this is why we often see Vinny tearing up the leaderboards. And often winning races, but maybe not always. As I was saying, though, about the old Merc that started AMG, I think it's the Red Pig, I was trying to hunt down what happened to that original car, and I believe what they said is they suspect it became a test mule for testing landing gear on aircraft or something along those lines. It was, I'd have to look that up, but it's very interesting.
Some of those cars were definitely big enough to do airplane testing with. I'm assuming that we'll get a Mercedes in Group 4 at some point in the future.
That and hopefully a BMW.
Mm-hmm. Also, would be, of course, amazing if Ferrari would consent to have their stuff in here, but we probably not really going to happen.
So it appears that Darcy's managed to hold about he's still holding something like the same gap now at this point on Vinny.
Kind of ping-ponging between about 3.5 to 5.5 seconds, depending on any given moment, plus where they are on the track. Closest fight on the track right now is for 5th place between... for 6th place between Steve Carman and Richard DeRoche in the Quarry and Interscope racing machines, respectively. Bit of an interesting name for Team Quarry.
So as crazy as these cars are, what's of interest too is the fact that the original, which I believe Race Room is modeled with this car, which was 1976, the following year it went from, it was originally 480 brake horsepower, it went to 550 brake horsepower.
Which is, of course, immense.
The Group 5 variant of this car was the 935, which was the more absurd-looking one with hellacious amounts of aero.
That's true.
Question of whether or not we might get that Group 5 Porsche at some point from Sector 3.
I suspect we will. They, of course, have got the big Porsche plans right now to implement them wherever they can. We've seen them enter GT4, GT3, now Group 4, their own Porsche Cup, of course. And now, and I assume we'll see Group 5 at some point, as well as maybe something for the prototypes? That would be very interesting.
So it looks like Vinny has managed to catch right up onto the back of Darcy now.
Pressure is on for the lead, for sure. Down to a half second. I assume Darcy had to have made a mistake for him to make up 4+ seconds on him at some point. And this is the main battle on the track. There's less than a second separate, or about a second separating Steve Carman and Yevgeny Lazarenko in the battle for fifth. But this is definitely the place of intrigue. This battle between Vinnie Roberts and Darcy Parkinson.
Yeah, Martin would appear to be 11, 12 seconds back, kind of in no man's land, until behind him you get all the way back to Philippe Fahea.
Martin has been the lonely man. Also, I would say that we could definitely probably confirm that Darcy made a mistake by the fact that Martin Edmonds has reduced the gap to the lead by about 3 seconds. So.
Yeah, but here again, you see that Darcy is pulling away from Vinny a bit, almost increasing the gap now to about a second. So he has something here on the straight that Vinny just doesn't have, whether it's a setup or just the line that's being taken.
That's true. We did see in qualifying that sector by sector there was a difference as to who was the Purple King, and it was between these two guys, with Vinny largely dominating the first sector and the second and third sectors favoring Darcy.
Yeah, the one thing I found that when I was playing with this car and killing myself repeatedly was changing the gearing definitely could help. So I suspect there's a difference in the gearing those two have set up. Based on Darcy's comments, I believe he tends to run with a default setup for the most part, so Vinny may have changed the gearing that now it just favors Darcy on the long straight more.
But it's given Vinny a bit of an advantage through the tight, twisty stuff, because he does seem to be getting a lot closer to his opponent there. Steve Carman putting the pressure on Yevgeny Lazarenko in the battle for 5th place. Yevgeny, of course, the most improved guy from his grid position up from 8th on the grid to 5th in the race. And as we've established, he is driving the same car as race leader Darcy Parkinson, so cannot complain about that. Steve brings the car alongside. Can he get the pass done? Easily. He's way past Yevgeny, who does not seem to have the pace on the straightaways, going back to that straight versus twisty battle that we were talking about with Vinny versus Darcy up front.
Yeah, this is definitely the scariest part of the track right here. You really have to be committed, and it's just so easy to go off if you get this wrong. Yeah, the cars almost look like they're pretty drivable when you watch them from the outside, but when you try to actually drive them, it feels like you're driving something that's barely controllable.
It's a bit of a war.
So once again, it looks like yeah, Darcy has managed to open the gap a bit to Vinny again.
Yep, 2.2 seconds now up there. Martin Edmonds largely on his own, as well as Felipe Fahea, but a good battle going on here for 5th between Steve Carman, Yevgeny Lazarenko, and Richard DeRoche. Eric Friesen is slowly wheeling them in lap after lap, about a couple of tenths. He definitely has a bit more speed, but he's had a couple of misfortunes that have put him back there in 8th place.
This is an interesting track. For some reason, I didn't even realize it existed in race room until this event came up. I don't know how I passed it over repeatedly.
It's the track that I think often gets forgotten a little bit. It's the other track in Austria in a lot of ways, to the Red Bull Ring, of course. And one with a lot of historical value, and a lot of good races have been raced here, but it is definitely one that tends to fall through the cracks. I find that I tend to forget that this one's around, and I also tend to forget that I'm actually blanking on the name of the track here. That's how bad that is. Salzburing. Zolder,
Oh, Zolder, yeah.
being actually in the game, which has a similar problem being in the same country as Spa.
True, true. I think of Zolder often, because I actually managed to go there when I lived in Germany. But yes, it is kind of a forgotten track in general.
Never been to Zolder myself. I have been to a couple of interesting tracks, notably Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal. Probably was the most exciting one because that was for an actual Formula One race.
Yes, I went to that, but it was not while an event was going on.
It was a tremendously different experience with the event and without the event, for sure. With different advantages.
Yeah, it looks like Darcy is still managing to increase this gap, so hard to say what's going on here that is causing Vinny issues, if it's concentration or tire wear or something here.
I suggest it could be a little bit of tire wear. His car is definitely the more active of the two, if you just watch it over the course of a lap.
Looks like Darcy's locked it up a little, though, into this this hairpin roundabout turn.
But we're getting into the part of the track where Darcy has a little bit of an advantage over him, this more flat-out, faster portion, where possibly the gear changes that Darcy did not make, as opposed to Vinny, are playing a role. Coming up in terms of events for ESR, the start of the Enduro Cup with the Audis later this month. That'll be very fun, and I may be bringing you live commentary of that as well. And of course, like I said, we have the Chang races for the ESR Zero Wednesday series, and also, of course, GT2 will be kicking off relatively shortly, so get your bookings confirmed for those events. And there may be a special announcement made very shortly in the Discord about a new project that ESR is undertaking.
Very exciting times.
Just trying to iron out a few last details where that is concerned. The battle for 6th is heating up between Yevgeny Lazarenko and the man on a mission, Richard Durocher. Richard getting ever so close, but it seems like Richard can get to within a second of the car ahead of him, but there seems to be no overtaking opportunity forthcoming for him. Could that be a setup question? Having not driven these cars in a race, I don't know if they experience a particular amount of dirty air getting up and behind something, or are they just that really not a question for their aerodynamics? But Richard creeps ever so closer. The battle currently at 0.6 of a second between the two in 6th and 7th position. In the meantime, Vinny is catching Darcy again, but not at a significant rate. And now Darcy is starting to pull away as they have more likely hit the section of the track where his car is more set up for it.
Yeah, Darcy is putting in a stellar race for somebody who suggested that he really wasn't looking forward to this.
Darcy often will say he's not looking forward to something and then come out and kick butt. I would say the battle for 3rd and 4th position is largely settled, but 5th place is very live at the moment. Eric Friesen's charge up to field has kind of stopped as he's kind of caught about 8 seconds behind this fight between Durocher and Lazarenko. Yevgeny got a little bit wide there, and the gap is down to 0.4 of a second between him and DeRoche. Look for DeRoche in the number 0 car to go on the attack. But alas, it appears that Yevgeny has got the legs on him in the straights and the faster speed portions of the track, which is probably one of the main reasons why Richard's unable to really attack him, although they're closing up again to under 0.4 of a second. We have 12 and a half minutes to go here, and Darcy Parkinson has led most of the way, now currently up 5.2 seconds, which I believe is more or less the largest lead he has had.
Yep, I believe that's correct. He just seems to be pulling out quite a gap. It must be tire wear. It's my best guess for why Vinny is just not able to keep pace.
Imagine that the rubber on these cars does get worn pretty easily. Let's have a comparison real quick of their fastest lap. So Darcy Parkinson's fastest lap is a 1:27.753. And for Mr. Vinnie Roberts, it is 1:28.251, so a significant difference there. Darcy has put together the more complete lap of the two for sure, having outpaced him by about a half second.
Looks like Yev has just managed to go off, and thankfully damage is off. He's gone careening into the barriers.
Hard impact for Yevgeny Lazarenko that will send him to the back of the pack, I would imagine. Yep, there's Eric Friesen zipping by. Tough break for Yevgeny, who may not have the pace really to make inroads again. He's been kind of profiting off of others' misfortune, and may be caught up by the fact that I think on just raw pace he doesn't really have the advantage over anyone.
Yeah, I think again it's that long straight and that right-hander. It's so difficult to get right. So you know, the slightest mistake or misjudgment and it costs you dearly.
Absolutely the case.
Yev driving the car that actually won, to my understanding, in the 1981 24-hour Le Mans, won in his class. Placed 17th overall.
An impressive result. Darcy Parkinson's still the man running away with it. He's up 5.2 seconds over Vinnie Roberts. No one else really at this point, I think, involved in this battle. Martin Edmonds is about 23 seconds back. Slowly losing a bit of ground to Felipe Fejea, but I think he's probably got a safe lead. Martin squealing the brakes a little bit on that particular run through this section of the track.
Indeed, and it looks like Yev has once again gotten that section of the track wrong, though manages to avoid the wall this time.
He is slipping back from the rest of the field. Really no one battling for position right now. The closest fight is 4.7 seconds between Steve Carman and Richard DeRoche for 5th position.
I gotta say, I'm impressed that we haven't had more offs. I would have expected many more by now.
Absolute kudos to all 8 of these drivers for a superb display of sim racing skill.
A hello to Josh in our YouTube chat, who says, nice choice of cars, retro.
Indeed. Always fun to bring out the retro cars once in a while.
Be curious to see if in a future update these cars' mechanics change a bit and become more drivable as the Porsche Cayman became with race room.
I would suspect not, because we talked about this a little bit earlier, that it appears that race room is going for the retro cars being more difficult to drive than they were when they were originally brought into the fight. So I would suspect this is fairly close to their final incarnation for the foreseeable future.
Hopefully they were just erring on the side of realism. Be interesting to see what, if we could see what people who actually drive these cars or drove them think of how close the sim gets to the real thing, with the understanding that, of course, that it is a simulation, it's a game.
Yeah, you're never going to quite replicate the real thing. Gap at the front is growing. It's up to about 8.5 seconds now. Darcy Parkinson, with about 7 minutes to go, has rather put his stamp of authority on the proceedings here today. Richard DeRoche is slowly closing down the gap to Steve Carman ahead of him. Now reading at 1.9 seconds. So the battle for fifth may not be over yet. Eric Friesen in the background. Been a bit of a rough day for Eric Friesen. He's had a couple of offs, and that has definitely limited his impact on the race.
It seems like Yev may be gaining some time on him. Just depends on the section of the track, but generally I think Eric has probably got seventh place wrapped up.
It does appear that Yev has a car that is behaving probably the most delta different from the rest of the field, so probably may have been a guy who put a lot of time into the setup that's giving it a little bit different characteristics.
Appears that Vinny has managed to stabilize the bleeding somewhere about at the 8-second gap, but still not really gaining a whole lot of time on Darcy.
And he's taking a little bit out of him at the start of each lap, just because I think the first sector favors him pretty heavily with how he set his car up. That being said, with 5 minutes to go, he needs to start finding inroads in sectors 2 and 3, which he's not really been able to do most of this race. The gap briefly there was over 10 seconds.
So I guess the claim to fame for these Porsche 984 Turbo RSR cars too is that they were the last of the road legal racing Porsches. So this was it. At that point, they kind of gets divided into between the ones that could actually be driven on the road by customers and those that were made for racing.
The dedicated race machine era of Porsche's history.
Yep, these cars had actually had power windows.
Bit of a luxury for the time. And of course, Porsche's racing program, highlighted by a World Formula One Championship win with the McLaren team in the 80s. And a record-setting performance, actually, by Niki Lauda. Well, Richard is closing the gap once again, but down to about 1.5 seconds. But again, doesn't seem to really be able to make a significant attempt to get 5th place away from Steve Carman. Eric Friesen falling back of this group and is, in fact, I think perhaps off the track.
Yeah, this looks like it'll be Yev's opportunity to overtake, possibly.
Did look like that gap between Yevgeny Lazarenko and Eric Friesen sinking significantly down to below 5 seconds, with about 3 laps to go here at the Salzburing. At the front, the gap continues to grow. Richard DeRoche once again reeling in Steve Carman, but at some point he's got to stop reeling him in and be able to go for a move.
Which is easier than it sounds in these cars, of course.
Absolutely. Easier than said than done in really any form of racing, to be honest.
Yeah, it's enough with these things to keep them on the track, much less also try to, navigate around another car.
Fastest lap of the race by a long shot is Darcy Parkinson's 1:27.753.
It's interesting we haven't seen Vinny break into the 127s.
Still at a 1:28.251, and at this point I don't think it'd be likely that he would post his best lap of the race, as we have theorized that his tires are probably past their best before date. I think really the last proper fight is this one between Richard DeRoche and Steve Carman, which again is down to less than a second.
This could make for an exciting finish. Steve has managed to put in quite a solid, consistent race here.
Indeed. Very solid. A guy who's also broken the 129 mark with his fastest lap of a 1:28.887. Something that Richard has not really been able to match. And Richard has been stuck behind him for some time. It looks like Yevgeny has maybe gone off again.
Yeah, what to say.
He's dropped back about 19 seconds behind Eric Friesen. And the winner of today's race, Darcy Parkinson.
Yeah, he pretty much swept the field there. That was pretty impressive.
Vinnie Roberts also crossed the checkered line. And he is done. I think Martin Edmonds should be shortly. Martin Edmonds is done across the line. Philippe Fehea and Steve Carman will hold off by just about 2 seconds ahead of Richard DeRoche.
Again,
coming to the line.
Still very impressed by how few spins and crashes in general there were.
A very impressive performance all around. Your winner is Darcy Parkinson from Vinnie Roberts and Martin Edmonds on the podium. Felipe Fehea, Steve Carman, Richard Roche, Eric Friesen, and Yevgeny Lazarenko rounding off the field. Looks like Yevgeny was lapped at the end of the race there by Darcy Parkinson. Congratulations to everyone who came out to race today in the Porsche One-Off event. It was an exciting race. Superb display of driving by all 8 men. These are absolute monsters that we're bringing around Salzburg, and they delivered with some pretty impressive pace. And a pretty close pace, all told. About 2 seconds from fastest lap to slowest lap in that regard. I think that's all for today. Scott, do you have anything to say to them?
I don't believe I do. Just thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching, and we will catch you next time. I believe my next commentary gig will be the Chang International Speedway Destination of Speed Race for the Zero Series.